Well, welcome back, everybody. We're now looking at the videos that we used for our third session together, our third and final session. And by now we have prepared the organization and we've prepared the volunteers. They are oriented and trained and ready to go. So now what happens? That's what we're getting into in this video is, what happens when they show up for work. And again, remember, the purpose of this training is to start from the beginning and learn everything about how to prepare your program to be effective with volunteers. And in this one, we're looking at some volunteer management strategies so that your program will work smoothly when people actually show up. Our last session, we looked at job design and marketing, screening, interviewing, orientation, and training. This time, we're bringing them on board, and we're going to talk about when we meet together on supervision and what to do if you meet a volunteer who's particularly challenging, how to do volunteer performance evaluations, how do you evaluate your program, how do you recognize volunteers, and then what happens? So supervision of volunteers is an art and a science. And it is not to be dismissed as something, though anybody can do it. McCurley and Lynch, in their volunteer management book, make the point that motivating those who do not work for pay requires more skill and greater ability than is the case among those who supervise paid volunteers. So employees, even if they're supervising other employees, still need some training and some support in supervising volunteers. And frequently they're painfully aware of that. This person doesn't even get paid. How do I supervise them? Well, in supervising volunteers, there are three things that are really important. The first one is the expectations. What are they there for? What is expected of them? Then to guide them and support them, particularly early on as they're starting this new thing, so that they can succeed, and then eventually to recognize and reward them for a job well done. We've been communicating expectations all along, the position description, that volunteer interview. And I would suggest that if you don't do it now, that you have a volunteer sign an agreement if they accept the position after the training. It doesn't have any legal binding, but if they've agreed that they're going to show up on Fridays for the next 3 months and do certain things, and they put their name on it and date it, it has some power, and just for persuasive power. They need to know the policies and procedures. They're usually in a volunteer handbook. And if you don't have a volunteer handbook, you do need one. And there's a great example actually in the resources on the 501 Commons website. We'll talk more about that later. And then, of course, they need orientation and training, which we've talked about. And once they get working, they need an ongoing evaluation. They're going to wonder, am I doing it right? Is this okay? Are they happy with me or not? And so evaluation is a constant procedure. How do we guide people? We head them in the right direction, give them the information they need to do the job, then some very specific, often instructions, and then we ask them for feedback and we give them feedback. On page 24 in your workbook, there is something that it's a classic, actually. I've found it in a half a dozen different places over the last 10 years. It's an exercise that shows possible strategies for instructing a group of volunteers to do a particular task. And I actually challenge you to read it, think about it, think of your responses and what worked and didn't work for you in those ways to instruct people. And then think about how you're motivated, whether as an achiever, or as an influencer, or as somebody who's just wanting to get connection with other people and socialize, how that impacts your response to these various scenarios of how you train volunteers. Be sure to take that exercise before we meet again.